This is Animal Magic, and today's episode is called Lock, Stock, and Barrel. One of the scariest moments in the whole Bible is in the 22nd chapter of the book of Genesis, a story about Abraham. And they came to the place which God had told him of. And Abraham built an altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called to him, Lay not thine hand upon the lad, for now I know that thou fearest God. And Abraham lifted up his eyes, and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. So imagine you're a ram. Your face is stuck in a thorn bush. Maybe you were practicing your headbutt, whatever. Now you're getting pricked all over your snout. And here comes this shepherd, someone who takes care of sheep and goats for a living, and he sets you free. But out of the frying pan and into the fire, as they say. Next thing you know, he's piling the wood, sharpening the knife, and he's got that Abrahamic look in his eye. The appearance of this ram is one of the great miracles of the Bible, but from an animal perspective, it's a horror. Abraham is tested to see if he fears God enough. Isaac is terrified. He's about to get slashed and burned and consumed by this deity. But it's the livestock who have the most to fear, because communication between humanity and divinity requires animal blood. It's like the liquid currency with which you pay your heavenly phone bill. Abraham is an eerie and mysterious character, a stranger. Those of us who remember Sunday school coloring books and church camp sing-alongs might first envision an ideal father figure, but this was the guy who mutilated his son's genitals, banished one, and almost slaughtered the other. Isaac, by the way, never speaks to Abraham again after this. Neither does Abraham's wife, Sarah. Abraham is also a symbol of a good shepherd, but it's hazardous to be one of his lambs. His rod and staff are not particularly comforting, especially when you see the gleam of the knife in his belt. He's entered into this covenant with God, covenant meaning to cut an animal apart. For the covenant ceremony, the Lord calls him to take a calf, a goat, a ram, a turtle dove, and a pigeon, split each one down the middle, so that Abraham and a floating lamp can walk together between the pieces. This was an old symbol for sealing a deal, passing through bisected animals together to symbolize a twin birth from a common animal womb. I told this story once, and afterward someone said it sounded so cruel, and she couldn't believe someone would hold an animal in such low regard that they would do this. In terms of cruelty, I can't say where this ranks alongside our modern meat and dairy industrial complex. But in terms of the value of an animal, I can say for certain that feeding the firstborn lamb or fatted calf to God was a sign of just how highly valued this animal was. Animal sacrifice involved giving up one's prized possession, just a step below your firstborn son. A couple centuries later, there is a famine in the land, and Abraham's descendants must go to the Egyptians who've been storing up extra grain. And they have to sell the Egyptians all of their livestock to get bread so they won't starve to death. But then that runs out. They sell whatever land they own, and finally they sell themselves into servitude. That's the meaning of lock, stock, and barrel, the land, livestock, and whatever alcohol you've got. So it's the Israelite herds and flocks who enter Egyptian captivity first, even before the Hebrew people. And for generations they live under the yoke of Egypt. And I can imagine how excited they were when they heard about this liberation movement. Picture a goat walking up to Moses saying, Hey man, I just want you to know, we're with you. We've been fleeced by Egypt for too long. We're not going to be sheep anymore, except the sheep. And we've been thinking God should soften the heart of Pharaoh. I mean, just a thought. You can chew the cud on that one. But we're in. Just one little thing. Some of the cows have been saying it, and I promised I'd at least bring it up. Instead of let my people go, how about let my creatures go? Like, really let Pharaoh know we're all in this together. Wait, what do you mean God's going to harden the heart of Pharaoh? And plagues? What plagues? On the livestock? Hold on there, cowboy. Egypt is being punished with a pestilence on the cattle, and the sheep and goats, the donkeys get sick and die. We didn't oppress anyone. We're slaves of Egypt too. Where is the justice in this? The Bible quickly reassures us that any livestock belonging to the Israelites would be spared. Until the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn sons of Egypt. And that's terrible. But on top of that, the Israelites are commanded to slaughter their sheep and goats, and the Lord specifies it has to be the handsomest ones, the prized young bucks of the herd, and paint their door frames with their blood. Well, the Hebrews got to Israel, and once the Jerusalem temple was built, it was a non-stop slaughterhouse where messages to God needed to be sealed in animal blood, like a postage stamp, or like the cookies you leave out for Santa to make sure he got your letter. The destruction of the temple in the year 70 was one of the saddest moments in all of Jewish history, but it was also the end of this animal sacrifice. Because the book of Leviticus specifies that animals can only be sacrificed in the temple, all references to blood offerings in the Torah have become metaphorical. Instead of celebrating good news by slaughtering the firstborn of the flocks, someone can fast for a week or make a charitable donation. This is especially good news for the lambs, even better than Isaiah's prophecy that someday they'd get to lay down with lions. I don't think the lambs were really that excited about that prospect. Certain animals, regardless of whether it was God or Mother Nature that came up with this strange idea, certain animals can imprint on a mother or father figure from another species. So the livestock in the Exodus story either didn't know that they weren't people or didn't know that the people weren't lambs. Whichever way it goes, the sheep follow the shepherd because they think he's a sheep. Like a really cool, tall sheep who can walk on two legs and only grows wool from the top of his head. And they think that he's got the best interests of sheep in mind. Perhaps we've heard the expression, a wolf in sheep's clothing, but you don't need a wool sweater to make this work. And a shepherd generally will look out for the sheep. That's his stock portfolio. See, that was a pun. His living lambskin wallet, his worldly wealth on the hoof. And they're more valuable for their renewable resources than their lamb chops. Let's remember here that a lamb or goat can transform grass and shrubbery into milk and wool for years before it's time to think about the slaughter. And then it's not just lamb chops. The shepherd can also turn the bones into a sacrifice for some hungry god, turn the guts into haggis, the wool into a kilt, the skin into a bagpipe. Perhaps it's this that gives the bagpipe its keening sound. A lamb has been turned into a squeaky balloon. Most carnivores go stalking their prey. We're pretty unique in that we can train our food to follow us around. Not just follow, they're completely lost without us, since we've bred them for stupidity. Sheep aren't naturally dumb. You've got to be pretty smart to be a lamb in the jungle. Just like cows aren't naturally easygoing. A stampede is like a flash flood of mad flesh mixed with an earthquake topped with a sandstorm. Not to mention the bull, one of the most effective killers in the wild. But through thousands of years of selective breeding, by which I mean unnatural selection, we have made these creatures dependent on us, and we have become dependent on them. Desmond Morris theorizes that herding may have begun with crop-thieving pigs and cows who then found themselves captured by farmers and gradually trained. I'm not sure when I'd locate animal herding in relation to farming, and since it happened independently in multiple places on Earth, it could go in either order. Either way, the move from gathering to gardening and hunting to herding, the concept of husbandry in general, does seem to arise from an idea that popped into the collective unconscious or whatnot around 10,000 years ago. The idea that humanity should take control of what thrives and what dies off in nature. Once you've got this paradigm in place, you may as well turn a forest into a cornfield and a calf into a walking factory. Plus the dog, who had long served as humanity's living nighttime blanket and burglar alarm, finally got a day job, keeping the flocks together. As animal species go, humans are pretty much omnivorous. We can eat all kinds of bugs, worms, snakes, fish, and animals, even the cockroaches of the sea, shellfish, who are usually hazardous to land animals. We can heat them with fire until they're pretty safe. There are certain things we shouldn't eat, like cat brains, but the kind of person who'd eat a tiger's brain sort of deserves to be eliminated in the next round of natural selection. human brains too, which apparently lions find human brains to be like a magically sweet ambrosia salad. It is, after all, a soupy supercomputer fueled by sugar. But I don't encourage you to find out, since eating human brains actually will turn you into a zombie. Anyway, we can eat all kinds of creatures, but we mostly limit our diet to a few herd animals, like beef, pork, and chicken. Animals that we have cultivated since the rise of civilization, and now they're pretty much dependent on us. But we have also become dependent on them. In the Gospels, there's an image of the final judgment, God dividing the sheep from the goats. And to the sheep he'll say something like, "Come and enter the kingdom, for when I was hungry and thirsty you fed me, when I was naked you brought me clothes, and when I was in trouble you visited me. Because whoever did this for someone else did it for me." And this is great news. But then he'll say to the goats, "When I was in need, you didn't help, so go into the eternal fire." Well, this is odd because, and I know this reading is a little too literal, but goats provide milk, meat, clothing, and company as well as sheep do. They just seem evil because of those weird eyes, like sideways snake eyes, and also because later Christians decided the devil must be part goat. Anyway, this was a parable about people, not literal livestock. But I'd like to think that someday God will gather the real sheep and goats and cattle and won't segregate them by species, but get them all together and say, "You guys are the real heroes, the saints and martyrs of history, and for feeding, clothing, and wet nursing poor, naked, helpless humanity for 10,000 years. Thank you."